Eleanor Washington stood in the silent courtroom, tears streaming down her weathered face, as Judge Richard Hargrove mercilessly berated her. "You people never learn respect for the law," he sneered, his words dripping with contempt. Just as he prepared to sentence her to jail for a minor traffic violation, Eleanor slowly reached into her handbag. The bailiff immediately drew his weapon, but Eleanor calmly pulled out a Department of Justice badge that gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights. What dark secrets would this small-town courthouse now be forced to reveal? If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, take a moment to like and subscribe, because tomorrow's episode will reveal how one woman's courage can bring an entire corrupt system crashing down. Eleanor Washington was not an ordinary grandmother. For 30 years, she had been a respected Department of Justice veteran, specializing in civil rights violations and judicial misconduct investigations. Her sharp mind and unwavering integrity had earned her the nickname the Equalizer among her colleagues. But 6 months ago, tragedy struck when her daughter Shanice died during a suspicious police traffic stop, leaving Eleanor to raise her 2 grandchildren, 12-year-old Marcus and 16-year-old Zora. Retirement came earlier than planned as Eleanor prioritized healing her traumatized grandchildren. On that fateful Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, Eleanor had been driving her grandchildren to school when flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Officer Darren Wilson claimed she had made an illegal left turn, despite the arrow signal clearly indicating she had right-of-way. As he approached her window, his hand rested uncomfortably close to his weapon. "License and registration," demanded without greeting, his tone immediately hostile. Eleanor complied calmly, aware of her grandchildren's frightened eyes watching from the back seat. The officer scrutinized her documentation with exaggerated suspicion, then wrote a citation with a hefty fine of $150. Later that evening, as Eleanor reviewed the citation, her trained eye noticed concerning discrepancies. The time of the alleged violation had been altered, and the officer's report contained contradictory statements about road conditions and traffic signals. Most troubling was his claim that she had been combative and uncooperative, when Eleanor had remained professionally composed throughout the encounter, conscious of modeling appropriate behavior for her grandchildren. Eleanor's curiosity led her to the county clerk's office, where she requested public records of recent traffic citations. After hours of meticulous research, a disturbing pattern emerged. In Millfield County, black drivers received citations at 4 times the rate of white drivers for identical infractions. Even more concerning, Judge Richard Hargrove, who presided over traffic court, imposed maximum penalties on 87% of minority defendants, while only 23% of white defendants received similar treatment. "This isn't about $150, Eleanor told her grandchildren as she prepared dinner. "This is about principle. Someone needs to shine a light on what's happening in Millfield County." Rather than simply paying the unjust fine, Eleanor decided to represent herself in court, compiling evidence of the discriminatory pattern she had uncovered. She spent days preparing her defense, printing statistical analyses and relevant legal precedents. Her grandchildren watched with admiration as their grandmother transformed from caretaker to legal warrior at the dining room table. The morning of her court appearance arrived with unexpected challenges. At the courthouse security checkpoint, Eleanor was subjected to an unusually thorough search. "What's in the briefcase, ma'am?" the security officer demanded, emptying her meticulously organized legal documents onto the table. "You bringing all this for traffic court? You must think you're some kind of lawyer." His colleague snickered, adding, "Probably just printed stuff from the internet." Eleanor maintained her dignity, silently gathering her scattered papers, while other defendants, predominantly white, passed through with minimal scrutiny. While waiting in the hallway outside the courtroom, Eleanor overheard a disturbing conversation between 2 courthouse clerks. "Got a full docket of Judge Hargrove's black tax cases today," one whispered to the other. "You know how he gets when they try to contest the tickets." The other nodded knowingly. "End-of-month quota. City budgets running low." The casual nature of their exchange suggested this was standard procedure, not an anomaly. As the morning progressed, Eleanor observed the proceedings with growing concern. White defendants received cursory hearings, often with reduced fines, or dismissed charges for first-time offenses, despite record checks revealing multiple prior violations. In contrast, minority defendants faced aggressive questioning and maximum penalties regardless of their driving history or circumstances. One elderly Latino man with limited English proficiency was denied an interpreter and fined double for wasting court time. When the bailiff finally called her name, Eleanor straightened her spine, gathered her evidence, and prepared to challenge not just her own citation, but an entrenched system of injustice that had operated unchallenged for far too long. As she approached the bench, Judge Hargrove barely glanced at her, his contemptuous expression suggesting he had already determined her fate before hearing a single word of testimony. Little did he know that the unassuming grandmother standing before him had spent 3 decades holding judges like him, accountable for precisely this type of misconduct. Judge Richard Hargrove's reputation in Millfield County was well established among minorities, but carefully maintained among the white power structure. His family had deep roots in local government, with his grandfather serving as sheriff during the Jim Crow era and his father as district attorney during the turbulent civil rights period. Hargrove had been appointed to the bench 15 years ago, after a mediocre career as a prosecutor, known for pursuing maximum sentences against minority defendants, while offering generous plea deals to whites. His courtroom was his fiefdom, where his word was absolute, and challengers quickly learned their place in his rigidly hierarchical worldview. Case number 47, Eleanor Washington. Illegal left turn, failure to follow traffic officer instructions. The court clerk announced mechanically. Eleanor approached the defendant's table with confident steps, placing her organized evidence, folders neatly before her. Judge Hargrove looked up with visible annoyance at these preparations, his typical traffic cases lasting less than 3 minutes before guilty verdicts were pronounced. "Mrs. Washington, how do you plead?" Judge Hargrove asked, already writing on his sentencing form before hearing her response. His presumption of guilt was evident in every movement. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Eleanor replied clearly. "And I have evidence demonstrating both my innocence and concerning patterns of discriminatory enforcement." The judge's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "This is a simple traffic violation, Mrs. Washington. Please restrict your comments to the specific incident." Eleanor began presenting her case methodically. "On April 14th at approximately 8:15 a.m., I made a legal left turn at the intersection of Maple and Pine Streets. The traffic signal displayed a green arrow and I proceeded when—" "Officer Wilson's report contradicts your claim," Judge Hargrove interrupted sharply. "Are you calling a sworn officer of the law a liar?" His tone carried an unmistakable warning. "I'm stating facts, Your Honor," Eleanor continued calmly. "Traffic camera footage from the adjacent bank building would confirm my account, but my request for this footage was denied by the police department without explanation." The judge sighed dramatically. "Mrs. Washington, we don't have time for conspiracy theories in this courtroom. The officer's testimony is clear. With respect, Your Honor, Officer Wilson is not present to testify, making his written statement hearsay that I cannot cross-examine," Eleanor noted, her legal knowledge becoming apparent. Judge Hargrove's face flushed slightly. "I'll determine what's admissible in my courtroom. You people always want special treatment instead of taking responsibility." The racial undertone of "you people" hung in the air. Several spectators shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor remained composed. "Your Honor, I've also compiled data showing troubling disparities in traffic enforcement and adjudication in this county. Black drivers are 4 times more likely to be cited for the same infractions and receive substantially higher fines when appearing before this court." "That's enough!" Judge Hargrove slammed his gavel. "This is about your violation, not some imagined systemic issue. Your fine is now $500 for wasting this court's time." Eleanor opened her folder of legal precedents. "Your Honor, in Thompson v. Louisville, the Supreme Court established that due process requires evidence of guilt, not merely accusation. Furthermore, in Smith v. Mississippi, the court found that statistical evidence of racial disparity in enforcement may establish prima facie evidence of discriminatory intent. The judge's face darkened dangerously. "Mrs. Washington, one more word of this legal babble and you'll be held in contempt. I'm beginning to think you need a lesson in respect for this court's authority." As Eleanor attempted to continue her defense, Judge Hargrove signaled to the bailiff, who stepped forward and switched off her microphone. "I've heard enough," the judge declared. "This court finds you guilty as charged, with an enhanced penalty for your disrespectful conduct." Throughout the courtroom, spectators watched with mixed reactions. Some appeared resigned, having witnessed similar treatment. Others surreptitiously recorded the proceedings on their phones, sensing the unusual nature of this confrontation. Officer Wilson's partner, present in the back row, smirked throughout the exchange. Judge Hargrove delivered his final verbal assault with calculated precision. "Mrs. Washington, I find your behavior here today particularly troubling given your age. What example are you setting for those grandchildren you're raising, teaching them to disrespect authority, rather than accepting the consequences of their grandmother's actions? Perhaps a night in county lockup would provide a more educational lesson than a mere fine." The courtroom fell silent, the judge's threat hanging in the air. Eleanor stood tall, her dignity intact despite the public humiliation. The moment stretched as Judge Hargrove waited for her to break, to apologize, to surrender as so many had before her. But Eleanor Washington had faced far more intimidating opponents during her career, and she recognized the textbook tactics of a judicial bully unaccustomed to challenge. What would you do if you were in Eleanor's position, facing blatant discrimination from someone in power? Comment number 1 if you believe she should reveal her DOJ credentials immediately. Or comment number 2 if you think she should document everything for a larger case. Like and subscribe if you believe justice should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their race or background. Would this judge's behavior change if he knew who he was really dealing with, or would it make things even worse for Eleanor? The courtroom remained deathly quiet as Eleanor maintained unwavering eye contact with Judge Hargrove. His smug expression suggested complete confidence in his untouchable position of power. After 30 years investigating judicial misconduct, Eleanor recognized the familiar patterns of someone who had never faced consequences for abusing their authority. "Your Honor," Eleanor finally spoke, her voice calm, yet carrying to every corner of the now hushed courtroom. "Before you proceed with that sentence, there's something you should know about me." She reached slowly into her handbag, causing the bailiff to step forward anxiously. From her bag, Eleanor withdrew a leather credential wallet, worn from decades of use but still bearing the unmistakable official seal of the United States Department of Justice. "My name is Eleanor Washington, retired senior investigator with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, Judicial Oversight Section." She opened the credential wallet, revealing her badge and identification card. "For 30 years, I specialized in investigating judicial misconduct and civil rights violations within our court system. I've personally led investigations, resulting in the removal of 17 judges for patterns of discriminatory conduct, remarkably similar to what I've witnessed in your courtroom today." The change in Judge Hargrove's demeanor was instantaneous and dramatic. The color drained from his face as the implications of Eleanor's identity registered. His hand, which had been poised to strike his gavel, now trembled slightly. "While I am retired," Eleanor continued with professional precision, "I maintain my clearances and professional relationships with the department. This case, which began as a simple matter of an unjust traffic citation, has revealed patterns that warrant formal investigation." She removed a small recorder from her pocket. "I've documented today's proceedings, as well as the statistical evidence of disparate treatment of minorities in your courtroom. This will be submitted as part of a formal request for federal review of Millfield County's judicial practices." Judge Hargrove attempted to regain his composure, forcing a strained smile. "Mrs. Washington, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. This court respects your distinguished career, of course." "It's Ms. Washington," Eleanor corrected firmly. "And this isn't about respect for me, but about equal justice under law for everyone appearing before this court." She turned slightly, addressing the full courtroom rather than just the judge. "The patterns I've documented show clear violations of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and potentially Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, regarding disparate impact in the administration of justice. Throughout the courtroom, spectators began whispering urgently. Several had their phones out, recording or live-streaming the unexpected confrontation. Among them was a local reporter who had slipped in for a routine court story, and now found himself witnessing something extraordinary. In the back row, Officer Wilson's partner was frantically texting, his earlier smirk replaced by evident alarm. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Hargrove announced abruptly, striking his gavel and rising quickly. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I formally request your recusal from all cases involving minority defendants pending completion of a thorough review," she stated loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And I will be submitting a request for stay of all fines and sentences imposed by this court against minority defendants during the past calendar year while the review is conducted." As Judge Hargrove hastily retreated to his chambers, the courtroom erupted into chaotic discussion. The bailiff appeared uncertain whether to clear the room or maintain order with the judge absent. The court clerk sat frozen at her station, staring at Eleanor with a mixture of fear and something that might have been hope. Outside the courtroom doors, Eleanor could hear the commotion spreading throughout the courthouse as word of the confrontation traveled. Her phone began vibrating with incoming calls and messages as social media posts from courtroom witnesses spread across local networks. What had begun as a simple stand against an unjust traffic ticket was rapidly evolving into something much larger and more significant. Eleanor took a deep breath, centering herself. During her career, she had faced intimidation, threats, and resistance from powerful figures desperate to maintain corrupt systems. She knew what would come next: the damage control, the denials, the attempts to discredit her. Judge Hargrove would not surrender his power without a fight, and he undoubtedly had allies throughout the local government and law enforcement. But Eleanor also knew that bringing these injustices to light was worth whatever personal cost she might bear. For her grandchildren, for her late daughter, for every person who had faced unfair treatment in this courtroom, she would see this through. As she gathered her documents, a young black woman approached hesitantly. "Ms. Washington," she whispered, "I'm a clerk in the records department. There's so much more you should know about what happens here. If you're really going to take him on, there are people who want to help." Eleanor nodded, understanding that her revelation had opened a door that many had been waiting for someone to walk through. The battle for justice in Millfield County had just begun, and it would prove far more dangerous and far-reaching than anyone in that courtroom could possibly imagine. As Judge Hargrove remained sequestered in his chambers, an extraordinary scene unfolded in the Millfield County Courthouse. Eleanor Washington, standing dignified in the now buzzing courtroom, became the center of a storm that had been brewing beneath the surface of this small community for years. The revelation of her Department of Justice background had cracked open a dam of long-suppressed grievances and fears. "Ms. Washington," a nervous voice spoke behind her. Eleanor turned to find a middle-aged white woman in courthouse attire, clutching a manila folder to her chest like a shield. "I'm Sarah Daniels, senior clerk for Judge Hargrove." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We need to talk somewhere private." Eleanor followed the clerk to a small conference room tucked away in a quiet corridor. Once the door closed, Sarah's professional composure crumbled. "I've been documenting everything for 3 years, she confessed, sliding the folder across the table. Sentencing disparities, ex parte communications with prosecutors about minority defendants, comments he makes when no one outside his staff can hear." Her hands trembled. "I've wanted to come forward, but he's connected to everyone who matters in this county. I'd lose everything." Eleanor opened the folder to find meticulously organized spreadsheets, tracking sentencing patterns by race, gender, and connection to prominent families. The disparities were even more stark than her preliminary research had suggested. "This is extraordinarily detailed work, Ms. Daniels." "Sarah, please." The clerk managed a weak smile. "My father taught statistics at the community college." "I know. What these numbers mean, it's not random, it's not coincidence." Before Eleanor could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the courthouse cafe. I can help. Malik Johnson, civil rights attorney. I need to meet someone, Eleanor told Sarah. Is there somewhere safe you can go? Judge Hargrove will soon realize his records have been compromised. Sarah nodded grimly. I made copies. The originals are still in place. He won't know what's missing because he never actually reviews the data. That's not how he operates. In Tom. The small courthouse cafe, Eleanor found a striking young black man in an impeccable suit waiting at a corner table. Malik Johnson, barely 30, but with the intense focus of someone who had already seen too much injustice, stood to greet her. Ms. Washington, your courtroom revelation is already trending locally, he said, showing her his phone screen displaying social media posts. I've been trying to build a case against Judge Hargrove for 2 years, but witnesses keep disappearing. Evidence gets lost, and no one will go on record. He leaned forward intently. Until today. Mr. Johnson, I'm retired. Eleanor reminded him. I'm just a grandmother fighting a traffic ticket. Malik smiled knowingly. With 30 years of DOJ experience and I suspect a network of federal contacts still in place, this county has been operating as its own fiefdom for generations. What you sparked today could change everything. Their conversation was interrupted by a young white woman who approached their table cautiously. Excuse me, she said, voice barely audible. I'm Jenny Keene, courthouse intern. I've been assigned to Judge Hargrove's chambers for my pre-law program. She glanced around nervously before placing a small USB drive on the table. He doesn't know his new dictation system records everything, even when he thinks it's off. There are things on here. Things he says about minority defendants, about women attorneys, about witnesses who don't know their place. As word spread, through the courthouse and into the community, more people began to gather. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had assembled outside the courthouse. Local civil rights leaders, families of defendants who had faced Judge Hargrove's harsh sentences, and curious citizens drawn by the social media buzz created an impromptu rally for judicial accountability. Inside, Eleanor made a disturbing discovery while reviewing Sarah's documents. Officer Darren Wilson, who wrote my citation. He's Judge Hargrove's nephew by marriage, she told Malik. That can't be coincidence. Nothing in Millfield County is coincidence, Malik confirmed grimly. The police chief, the DA, 3 judges including Hargrove, and the county commissioner all belong to the same country club. They attend the same church. Their families intermarry. They protect their own and punish outsiders, especially people of color who challenge their authority. The courthouse doors swung open as local reporter Michael Chen hurried toward their table. Ms. Washington, I've been investigating Judge Hargrove for the Millfield Observer for months, but my editor keeps killing the story. Advertisers threatened to pull out if we ran anything critical of the local judiciary. He placed his notebook on the table. But I've kept every interview, every document, every lead. It's all yours if you can finally bring this to light. By late afternoon, Eleanor had established an impromptu command center in the courthouse cafeteria. Citizens continued to come forward with stories of judicial abuse, discrimination, and corruption. Malik's legal expertise helped organize the growing evidence into categories of potential federal and state violations. The young intern, Jenny, provided insider knowledge of courthouse procedures and personnel loyalties. Michael's journalistic connections spread word to neighboring counties, where similar patterns of abuse had been reported. As the impromptu coalition gained momentum, a courthouse security officer approached Eleanor with a message. Judge Hargrove would like to speak with you privately in his chambers, the officer relayed awkwardly. He says there's been a misunderstanding that could be resolved quickly and quietly. Eleanor shared the message with her growing team. He's offering a deal, Malik interpreted immediately. Drop everything and he'll make your traffic ticket disappear. It's what he always does, Sarah confirmed. When someone with power pushes back, he retreats temporarily, then destroys them through back channels once the spotlight moves on. Eleanor considered the invitation thoughtfully. This was never about a traffic ticket, she told the assembled group. This is about a systemic failure of justice that has harmed countless families. I didn't come looking for this fight, but now that it's found me, I can't walk away. As evening approached, The crowd outside the courthouse had grown to over 100 people. News vans from the state capitol had arrived, setting up for live broadcasts. Social media had transformed a routine traffic court appearance into a symbol of resistance against long-established discrimination. And throughout the afternoon, people continued approaching Eleanor with their stories. A mother whose son received 10 years for a minor drug offense, while a judge's nephew walked free for the same crime. A black business owner whose discrimination, complaint against the police department, mysteriously disappeared from court records. A Latino family whose home was seized through questionable eminent domain proceedings to make way for a country club expansion. Eleanor looked out at the gathering community with mixed emotions. The courage of these people in coming forward touched her deeply, but she also recognized the danger they now faced. Judge Hargrove and his allies would not surrender their power without a vicious fight. Have you ever witnessed someone in power abuse their authority and wished you could do something about it? Comment number 1 if you believe Eleanor is right to build this coalition, or comment number 2 if you think she's putting these people at unnecessary risk. Like and subscribe if you believe in the power of community to stand against injustice. What do you think Judge Hargrove's next move will be, now that his private offer has been rejected? Eleanor Washington knew from decades of experience that powerful people rarely surrender without deploying every weapon in their considerable arsenal. Still, the ferocity and speed of Judge Hargrove's counterattack took her by surprise. By morning, the battle lines had been clearly drawn, and the judge had made it abundantly clear that he would stop at nothing to maintain his position and power. Eleanor awoke at dawn to the sound of breaking glass. Rushing downstairs, she found her front window shattered, a brick lying amid the glittering shards on her living room floor. Wrapped around the brick was a note with a crude message: "DOJ bitch go home." Spray painted across her front door in vivid red were racial slurs that made her heart sink, not for herself but for her grandchildren, who would soon see them. "Don't go outside, Grandma," Marcus called from the top of the stairs, his young voice tight with fear. "There's more stuff on the garage and the car." By the time police arrived, Eleanor had already documented everything with her phone camera. The responding officers, clearly uncomfortable, took minimal notes and suggested it was probably just teenagers, despite the specific reference to her DOJ background. No fingerprints were collected, no neighbors interviewed, no real investigation conducted. "We'll file a report," the senior officer said with palpable disinterest. "Not much else we can do." As Eleanor was dealing with the vandalism, her phone rang constantly with alerts. Local news was reporting that Judge Richard Hargrove had filed an emergency motion with the district court, claiming Eleanor had threatened and intimidated court officers and disrupted judicial proceedings with false accusations. The motion sought a restraining order, preventing her from entering the courthouse, and a gag order blocking her from discussing court proceedings. When Eleanor finally checked her answering machine, she found it filled with anonymous threats. "You don't know who you're messing with," growled one caller. "Accidents happen to nosy grandmas," warned another. "Those grandkids of yours walk to school alone?" asked a third, the implicit threat chilling Eleanor to her core. By mid-morning, a police detective arrived at her door, his expression professionally neutral. "Ms. Washington, I'm Detective Roberts with Professional Standards. We've received a complaint that you've been practicing law without a license by representing yourself in court and offering legal advice to others." "That's absurd," Eleanor responded, calmly. "Representing oneself is a constitutional right, and I haven't offered legal services to anyone," the detective shrugged. "Just following up on the complaint, ma'am. The penalty for unauthorized practice of law in this state is quite severe, up to 5 years imprisonment." As the detective left, Eleanor received a distressing call from her grandchildren's school. "Miss Washington, I need you to come in immediately," the principal stated firmly. "There's been an incident involving Zora." At the school, Eleanor found her granddaughter in tears. Zora's history teacher, Mrs. Pemberton, had singled her out during class discussion about civil disobedience, using her grandmother as an example of people who disrespect the law while pretending to uphold it. When Zora defended Eleanor. The teacher sent her to the principal's office for talking back. Mrs. Pemberton is Judge Hargrove's wife's cousin, the principal admitted quietly, after hearing Eleanor's outrage. I can transfer Zora to another class, but you should know, this won't be the last incident. This town has long memories for those who challenge the status quo. That afternoon, Eleanor was shocked to see the local newspaper's front-page headline, "Retired federal employee claims conspiracy in traffic court. Mental health experts question age-related delusions." The article quoted unnamed medical experts, suggesting that elderly individuals often fabricate conspiracies when facing minor legal troubles, their aging minds unable to accept culpability. The piece carefully avoided outright libel while systematically undermining Eleanor's credibility and mental competence. When Eleanor checked her bank account to pay for window repairs, she discovered her most recent retirement payment hadn't been deposited. A call to the Federal Benefits Office revealed an administrative hold had been placed on her account, pending resolution of certain questions about eligibility. The representative couldn't provide details, but mentioned the review had been initiated by someone in the regional office with connections to Millfield County. By evening, Judge Hargrove's allies in county government had closed ranks. The courthouse announced emergency security protocols, requiring advanced screening for all visitors, effectively blocking access for many community members. The county commissioners called an emergency session to discuss frivolous accusations against respected public servants and the unnecessary taxpayer burden of responding to unfounded complaints. Eleanor's small team of allies faced similar pressures. Malik Johnson received notice that his law practice was under investigation for ethical violations. Sarah Daniels was placed on administrative leave pending review of improper handling of confidential court documents. Michael Chen was fired from the newspaper for violating journalistic standards. Judge Hargrove's machine was systematically isolating Eleanor by destroying her support network. As night fell, Eleanor checked the security system Malik had hastily installed that afternoon. All seemed quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She called her grandchildren to dinner, determined to maintain normalcy despite the mounting pressure. As they ate, she noticed Marcus barely touched his food. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Billy at school said, "They're going to take us away from you," he whispered, eyes downcast. He said his dad works for family services, and they're building a case that you're an unfit guardian because you're causing trouble. Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze his hand, pushing down her fury to project calm reassurance. "That is not going to happen," she promised. "Some powerful people are angry with me for standing up to them, but we have truth on our side, and I have friends too, friends with their own kind of power." After the children went to bed, Eleanor made a final check of the house before retiring. In her driveway, she noticed a puddle beneath her car that hadn't been there earlier. Grabbing a flashlight, she discovered brake fluid leaking from a clean cut in the brake line. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer just about intimidation. Someone wanted her dead. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, hands steady despite the attempt on her life, and made a decision. She had spent her career working within the system to correct its flaws. But Judge Hargrove and his allies had made it clear they would not be constrained by legal niceties or ethical boundaries. To fight them effectively, she would need to be equally unbounded in her approach, equally relentless in her pursuit of justice, and willing to risk everything to protect not just her family, but all the families who had suffered under this corrupt regime. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "James, it's Eleanor Washington. I need the kind of help that doesn't leave a paper trail. Yes, it's that serious. They've already tried to kill me once today." 3 days after the brake line incident, Eleanor Washington had transformed her modest ranch home into a secure command center. James Mercer, her former DOJ colleague and specialist in witness protection operations, had arrived within hours of her call with a team of trusted security experts. They swept the house for surveillance devices, installed cutting-edge security systems, and established encrypted communication protocols for Eleanor's growing network of allies. "This is no small-town judge throwing a tantrum," James observed grimly. after reviewing the evidence Eleanor had gathered. "This is organized, systematic corruption with tendrils throughout the county government. We're dealing with people who won't hesitate to eliminate threats permanently." With her home secured and her grandchildren temporarily relocated to stay with Eleanor's sister in another state, Eleanor and her core team could focus on their most critical task: building an ironclad case against Judge Hargrove and his network that would withstand any attempt at obstruction or cover-up. Malik Johnson brought legal expertise and connections to civil rights organizations. Sarah Daniels provided insider knowledge of court operations and access to records. Michael Chen, though unemployed, maintained relationships with journalists from larger markets who could publish stories beyond local influence. Jenny Keane continued, her internship in Judge Hargrove's chambers, now serving as their eyes and ears within the courthouse itself. "We need to establish patterns beyond individual anecdotes," Eleanor explained, as they gathered around her dining room table. "Statistical evidence, documentation of systematic disparities, and connections between judicial decisions and personal or financial interests." The team divided responsibilities and began methodical investigation. Malik focused on case outcomes, pouring through public records to document sentencing disparities. "It's even worse than we thought," he reported after the first day. In DUI cases alone, white defendants receive probation 89% of the time, while black defendants with identical blood alcohol levels and similar driving records receive jail sentences 78% of the time. Sarah worked with courthouse contacts to identify missing or altered records. Certain case files keep disappearing from the system, she discovered, particularly ones involving prominent families or businesses with connections to Judge Hargrove. Their first major breakthrough came when Eleanor used her DOJ credentials to access sealed records that local authorities had claimed were destroyed in a storage flood. The recovered documents revealed a disturbing pattern. Judge Hargrove had consistently dismissed cases or reduced charges against defendants connected to Millfield Properties, a major local development company. Why would a traffic court judge handle property and zoning cases? Eleanor wondered. Further investigation provided the answer. Judge Hargrove owned significant shares in Wellspring Correctional Services, a private prison company that operated the county detention center. His harsh sentences against minority defendants directly benefited his investment portfolio. "This is textbook conflict of interest," Malik confirmed. "He's literally profiting from every person he sends to jail." "And it gets worse," Michael added, bringing in financial documentation obtained through a contact at the State Commerce Commission. Millfield Properties is owned by a shell company that traces back to the same investment group that controls Wellspring Correctional. The judge is part of a vertically integrated operation. They drive people from their homes through selective code enforcement and zoning changes, then profit again when those same people end up in their private jails for minor offenses. While the financial connections provided compelling evidence, Eleanor knew they needed more to overcome the judge's political protection. "We need to find his communication with others in the network," she explained. "Judges rarely operate alone in these systems." This crucial breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Eleanor's grandson, Marcus, an avid computer programmer, had been silently observing the team's frustration with recovering deleted emails and documents. "Grandma," he said quietly one evening, "I might be able to help." Using techniques he'd learned in his high school computer club, Marcus showed the team how to recover deleted emails from the courthouse server backups that Jenny had gained access to. "They delete the emails, but the system keeps regular backups for disaster recovery," he explained. "They aren't encrypted because they never expected anyone to look there." The recovered emails painted a damning picture of judicial corruption. Judge Hargrove corresponded regularly with 4 other county judges, the district attorney, and several high-ranking police officials. They explicitly discussed strategies for maintaining their control over the county's legal system, often using coded but recognizable racial language when referring to minority communities. Most disturbing was evidence of an informal competition among the judges. "Got another one for the farm today," Judge Hargrove wrote to his colleagues after sentencing a young black man to 6 months for possession of marijuana. That puts me 3 ahead for the quarter. The farm referred to the private detention facility where the judges held financial interests. As their evidence mounted, Eleanor's team faced increasingly sophisticated opposition. Their secure communication system detected a series of coordinated cyber attacks attempting to penetrate their digital security. Physical surveillance of team members became more obvious, less an attempt at intimidation than preparation for direct action. They're getting desperate, James warned after intercepting communications between local police and private security contractors. They know we're building a case. They'll move against us before we can complete it. Eleanor gathered her team for a crucial strategy session. We've confirmed Judge Hargrove is part of a county-wide network of corruption that has systematically extracted wealth from minority communities, denied equal protection under law, and profited from the resulting incarceration. We've documented financial conflicts of interest, ex parte communications, and explicit bias, but we're still missing something fundamental. Witnesses willing to testify, Malik suggested. Exactly, Eleanor agreed. Documents and statistics make a compelling paper case, but juries and the public respond to human stories. We need people willing to stand up publicly against this system. After what they've done to us for just investigating, Sarah asked skeptically. Who would take that risk? Eleanor smiled for the first time in days. People who have nothing left to lose, and people who have everything to gain from justice finally being served. What would you be willing to risk to expose corruption in your community? Comment number 1, if you believe gathering evidence like Eleanor's team is the best approach, or comment number 2 if you think immediate public exposure would be more effective. Like and subscribe if you believe in fighting for justice even when the system seems stacked against you. How far do you think Judge Hargrove and his allies will go to protect their corrupt network once they realize how much evidence Eleanor has gathered? What had begun as an investigation into one prejudiced judge had evolved into something far more sinister and far-reaching. As Eleanor Washington and her team connected the dots between seemingly disparate pieces of evidence, a chilling picture emerged of corruption that extended throughout Millfield County's power structure and beyond. It's not just Judge Hargrove, Eleanor explained to her team one evening, spreading documents across her dining room table. He's just one node in an entrenched network. She pinned photos to a large corkboard. Judge Hargrove, Police Chief Thomas, Grantham, District Attorney William Preston, County Commissioner Victoria Harmon, and 3 other county judges. Malik Johnson reviewed financial records they'd obtained through public information requests and confidential sources. The money trail is clearer now, he reported. Judge Hargrove's private prison investments are just the beginning. The entire system is designed to extract wealth from minority communities. Sarah Daniels, using her knowledge of county record-keeping, had created a comprehensive map of traffic stops, citations, property seizures, and court outcomes. Look at this pattern, she indicated, pointing to clusters of markers in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. Traffic enforcement is 5 times heavier in minority areas, resulting in millions in annual fines. When people can't pay, they face jail time in the private facility where our judicial friends hold investments. Michael Chen, following connections to real estate developments, made another disturbing discovery. After analyzing 10 years of property records, I found that neighborhoods with high rates of code enforcement citations and criminal prosecutions consistently experience property devaluation, followed by bulk purchases by shell companies connected to Millfield properties. Gentrification through criminalization, Malik observed grimly. The team's most shocking discovery came when Eleanor connected Judge Hargrove to a sophisticated gerrymandering scheme. Using her DOJ contacts, she obtained confidential maps showing how district lines had been redrawn specifically to dilute minority voting power in county elections. The voting districts were manipulated to ensure that, even as the county's demographics changed, power remained concentrated in the hands of the same network, Eleanor explained. They've literally mapped out which neighborhoods to target with aggressive policing and prosecution to discourage civic participation. Jenny Keene, still working in the courthouse, discovered a hidden pattern in campaign finance records. Judge Hargrove and the other judges aren't just receiving normal campaign contributions, she reported. They're getting laundered money through courthouse contracts for services like cleaning, maintenance and security. The companies getting these inflated contracts then make donations to judicial campaigns through individual employees. That's textbook corruption, James noted, but incredibly difficult to prove without inside witnesses. The most disturbing revelation came when Eleanor was reviewing cold cases from Millfield County. 3 people who attempted to expose aspects of this system died under suspicious circumstances in the past decade, she told the team soberly. Andrea Martinez, a county clerk who questioned judicial appointment procedures. Darius Jackson, a community activist who organized against the private detention center. And Robert Kim, a journalist investigating connections between the police department and judicial campaigns. All ruled accidents or suicides, Sarah added, her voice tight with fear. With investigations led by the same police department implicated in the corruption, Eleanor confirmed. We're dealing with people who won't hesitate to silence threats. Permanently. Further investigation revealed that the State Oversight Committee, supposedly responsible for monitoring judicial conduct, was compromised as well. 3 of the 5 committee members have financial connections to the same investment group, behind Millfield Properties and Wellspring Correctional, Malik discovered. The 4th member's daughter works as legal counsel for the private prison company. They've been burying complaints for years. The conspiracy reached even higher. Documents obtained through Eleanor's federal contacts revealed that the governor's office had been involved in judicial appointments throughout the state, with a clear pattern of placing candidates with connections to private detention companies in counties with significant minority populations. This isn't just about racial bias or one corrupt judge, Eleanor told her team as they absorbed the scope of their discoveries. This is systematic extraction of wealth and liberty from targeted communities, coordinated at multiple levels of government, protected by those sworn to uphold the law, and profitable for everyone involved in maintaining the system. The evidence they had gathered exposed not merely individual corruption, but an entrenched power structure that had operated with impunity for generations. What had begun as Eleanor's stand against an unjust traffic ticket had unveiled a conspiracy that affected thousands of lives and millions of dollars. We've uncovered something that goes beyond Millfield County, Eleanor acknowledged. Similar patterns likely exist throughout the state, possibly the region. The question now is whether we focus on Judge Hargrove as our entry point or attempt to expose the entire network simultaneously. The stakes had risen exponentially. Judge Hargrove and his allies now had everything to lose, and Eleanor's team had discovered enough to understand that these powerful figures would stop at nothing to protect their positions and profits. Every day brought new surveillance attempts, new threats, new pressure on team members and their families. We're in grave danger, James warned after intercepting communications between private security contractors hired by the network. They know we have evidence that could destroy not just careers, but an entire system of control. They're discussing options, including some that involve permanent solutions to the problem we represent. Eleanor gathered her team, aware that each person present was risking everything by continuing this fight. I need everyone to understand what we're facing, she said solemnly. This began as my battle, but you've all chosen to stand with me. The people we're investigating have resources, connections, and a willingness to use violence to protect themselves. Anyone who wants to step back now can do so with my complete understanding and support. No one moved. Then we need to make contingency plans, Eleanor continued. Everyone needs secure storage of evidence, emergency contacts, and predetermined protocols if any of us disappear or are arrested. From this moment forward, we operate with the assumption that our opponents are willing to kill to stop us. As the team established security protocols and evidence backup systems, Eleanor faced the grim reality that she had placed not just herself, but everyone around her in the crosshairs of a powerful, ruthless network with everything to lose. The pursuit of justice had never felt more dangerous or more necessary. The investigation had progressed remarkably over 3 intensive weeks. Eleanor's dining room walls were covered with evidence boards connecting Judge Hargrove to an expansive network of corruption. Secure digital repositories held thousands of documents, financial records, and witness statements. The team had established communication with federal authorities who expressed serious interest in their findings. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to believe they might succeed in exposing the truth and bringing the corrupt network to justice. Then came the betrayal. Eleanor arrived home after meeting with a potential witness to find her front door slightly ajar. Inside, her evidence boards had been stripped bare. Her computer was open, files clearly accessed. The physical documents they had meticulously gathered were gone. Someone had thoroughly, systematically removed every piece of evidence from her home. "We've been compromised," James stated immediately after inspecting the scene. "This wasn't random. They knew exactly what to take and where to find it. Someone on the inside gave them access and information." Eleanor's team gathered in grim emergency session. The infiltration was undeniable, but the identity of the traitor remained unknown. Each person present was now suspect. Trust, the foundation of their collaboration, had been shattered. "The backup drives?" Eleanor asked tensely. "Gone," Malik confirmed. "All 3 local copies. They knew where each was hidden." "What about our cloud backup?" Sarah asked. Michael checked the secure server. "Wiped clean. They had our encryption keys." Eleanor maintained her composure through decades of professional discipline, but inside she felt a cold dread spreading. "And the witness list?" "We have to assume they have everything," James said gravely. "Names, addresses, testimony. Everyone who spoke to us is now at risk." The betrayal extended beyond theft of evidence. By morning, the damage was unmistakable and expanding. Throughout Millfield County, witnesses who had confidentially shared their experiences of discrimination began reporting intimidation and threats. Malik received notice. His law license was suspended pending investigation of serious ethical violations. The State Attorney General, whose office had expressed interest in their findings, issued a premature public statement declaring no evidence of wrongdoing in Millfield County's judicial system. Eleanor's former DOJ colleagues, once supportive, if cautious, suddenly became unreachable. Calls went unanswered, emails returned with auto-replies directing her to official channels for filing complaints. The institutional support she had counted on vanished overnight. The local media landscape shifted dramatically as well. The Millfield Observer ran a front-page story characterizing Eleanor as a vindictive retiree with a personal vendetta against respected public officials. Television news segments featured legal experts questioning why a grandmother would invent conspiracy theories rather than simply paying a traffic fine. Social media accounts spread rumors about Eleanor's mental health, suggesting her decades of distinguished public service had ended due to cognitive concerns rather than retirement. "They're trying to discredit you before we can reassemble our case," Malik observed, watching the coordinated media campaign unfold. The attacks extended beyond reputation to livelihood. The State Bar Association launched an ethics investigation into Malik's practice, threatening his ability to represent clients. Sarah Daniels was fired from her courthouse position for unauthorized access to confidential records. The court, clerk who had provided critical documents, faced criminal charges for theft of government property. Most disturbingly, Eleanor's personal information appeared on dark web forums frequented by extremists. Her home address, daily routines, and family details were posted alongside veiled suggestions that someone should solve the problem permanently. James detected multiple attempts to access her financial accounts, medical records, and even her grandchildren's school files. The technical sophistication of these attacks suggested resources far beyond a county judge's normal reach. "They've activated serious connections," James warned. "This level of coordination involves state or even federal assets. Someone with significant influence is pulling strings." Eleanor remained focused, despite the escalating pressure, working to identify the betrayer and rebuild their evidentiary foundation. "We still have our memories, our knowledge of what we discovered," she reminded the team. "We can reconstruct the case." But the betrayal had cut deeper than evidence theft. It had revealed their entire strategy to their opponents, who moved swiftly to close every avenue of investigation. Court records suddenly became unavailable for digitization due to technical issues. Witnesses who had agreed to testify received unexpected job offers in distant locations, or conversely, faced sudden termination from long-time positions. The private communications between judges and other officials that they had documented were explained away as routine administrative consultations mischaracterized by inexperienced observers. The coordinated counter-offensive continued relentlessly. Eleanor's computer was remotely accessed again despite enhanced security, with concerning searches conducted in her name for explosive materials, weapons and extremist literature. They're building a framework to discredit anything we might still reveal, James explained grimly. Or worse, setting the stage for criminal charges. Then came the most devastating blow. Eleanor returned from a meeting with her remaining allies to find a voicemail from her sister in Chicago. "Eleanor, Zora is gone," her sister's panicked voice reported. "She went to the corner store and never came back. Police are saying she's probably just a runaway teen, but she left her phone, her money, everything. Someone took her, Eleanor. I know it. Call me back immediately." Within an hour, Eleanor received a text message from an unknown number containing a photo of her unconscious granddaughter in a nondescript room. The message was chillingly simple. "End your investigation. Destroy all evidence. Make a public statement apologizing for false accusations against respected public servants. You have 24 hours." For the first time since beginning this battle, Eleanor felt true despair threatening to overwhelm her. The corrupt network had demonstrated their willingness to target not just her, but the person she loved most in the world. The message was unmistakable. Nothing was off-limits in their determination to maintain power. As Eleanor gathered her remaining allies to address this crisis, the identity of the betrayer finally became clear. Jenny Keene, the courthouse intern, who had provided crucial inside information, failed to appear at their emergency meeting. Attempts to contact her revealed her phone disconnected, her apartment emptied. Within hours, she appeared at a press conference alongside Judge Hargrove, tearfully describing how Eleanor had manipulated vulnerable people into supporting baseless conspiracy theories and fabricated evidence against respected public officials. She was their plant from the beginning, James realized, feeding us enough real information to gain our trust while reporting everything back to them, the perfect inside source. Have you ever trusted someone who later betrayed that trust? Comment number 1 if you believe Eleanor should negotiate to save her granddaughter. Or comment number 2 if you think giving in to threats will only make things worse. Like and subscribe if you believe even the most carefully built cases can be vulnerable to betrayal. With Eleanor's granddaughter in danger and her evidence stolen, how can she possibly continue her fight against such ruthless opponents who seem to have every advantage? The kidnapping of her granddaughter pushed Eleanor Washington beyond anything she had experienced in 30 years of investigating corruption and civil rights violations. As the 24-hour deadline approached, the physical and emotional strain became overwhelming. During a tense strategy session with her remaining allies, Eleanor suddenly clutched her chest, her face contorting in pain before she collapsed. The hospital diagnosis was a stress-induced cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but a serious warning signal that her body could no longer withstand the extreme pressure she had been under. Confined to a hospital bed, with monitoring equipment tracking her vital signs, Eleanor faced the most difficult decision of her life. "You have to stop, Grandma," Marcus pleaded, his young face lined with worry beyond his years. "First Mum, now Zora. I can't lose you too." Tears streamed down his face as he gripped her hand. "They're too powerful. They'll destroy all of us." Eleanor's few remaining allies echoed similar concerns. Malik Johnson, his once immaculate appearance now haggard from weeks of pressure, visited briefly between dealing with the assault on his legal practice. "We can rebuild our lives if we walk away now," he suggested quietly, but if anything happens to Zora, he couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah Daniels, unemployed and facing potential criminal charges for her role in exposing courthouse records, called from a burner phone. "My children are being followed to school," she whispered. "My husband was just fired from his job of 15 years. They're systematically destroying everyone connected to you, Eleanor. Maybe we need to accept that they've won this round. Even James, with all his experience in high-stakes federal investigations, counseled retreat. We've lost our evidence, our witnesses, and our institutional support, he assessed clinically. Continuing under these conditions puts everyone at grave risk, especially your granddaughter. Sometimes strategic withdrawal is the only rational option. The pressure to surrender mounted when Judge Hargrove made a calculated public appearance that dominated local media. In a carefully orchestrated interview, he expressed deep concern for Eleanor's health and sincere forgiveness for her misguided accusations. As a Christian and public servant, I hold no ill will toward Ms. Washington, the judge stated, with practiced sincerity. Her distinguished career makes these recent actions all the more tragic. I only pray she receives the medical and psychological support she clearly needs. The subtext was unmistakable. Surrender now and we'll allow you the dignity of a medical excuse. Resist and we'll destroy whatever remains of your reputation and family. Financial pressure intensified the crisis. Eleanor's retirement benefits remained frozen. Her healthcare coverage was suddenly under review, leaving her responsible for mounting hospital bills. Her mortgage company initiated foreclosure proceedings based on documentation irregularities, threatening the home she had owned for 20 years. The isolation deepened when Eleanor's former DOJ supervisor, once a mentor and friend, called with an unmistakable warning disguised as concern. "Eleanor, I'm worried about these statements you're making," he began carefully. "Several colleagues report you making accusations that seem, frankly, paranoid. Given your age and recent stress, perhaps you're misremembering certain events or misinterpreting normal governmental processes." The implication was clear. Continue and your own former colleagues will question your mental competence. The system was closing ranks, offering a choice between surrender with dignity partially intact or complete professional and personal destruction. As Eleanor's physical condition stabilized, hospital staff informed her that a wellness evaluation had been scheduled without her consent. "Just routine for patients your age experiencing stress," the nurse assured her, though Eleanor recognized another attempt to establish grounds for questioning her mental capacity. The conspiracy reached directly into her hospital room. Late one night, Eleanor noticed a small device partially hidden in the television housing. Using techniques James had taught her, she discovered an active listening device monitoring her visitors and conversations. Her hospital room had become another surveillance zone, her medical condition another weapon in their arsenal. In her darkest moment, lying alone in her hospital room with monitors beeping steadily beside her, Eleanor Washington considered surrender. Her evidence was gone. Her allies were under attack. Her granddaughter was in the hands of people who had demonstrated their ruthlessness. Perhaps accepting defeat was the only way to protect what remained of her family and the brave people who had stood with her. Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overwhelming her vigilance. She drifted into troubled sleep, filled with images of her late daughter, of her missing granddaughter, of the countless faces of those who had suffered under the corrupt system she had tried and failed to expose. In her dream, Eleanor stood in an empty courtroom. Judge Hargrove looked down from his bench, his face twisted in contempt. "You've lost, Eleanor Washington," he sneered. "The system always wins against people like you." Behind him stood shadowy figures in police uniforms, business suits, judicial robes, all watching her with cold, calculating eyes. But then another figure appeared beside Eleanor. Her daughter Shanice, beautiful and strong as she had been in life. "Mom," she said softly, "you taught me that justice isn't given. It's fought for, demanded, sometimes at terrible cost. You taught me to stand when everyone else sits down." Eleanor woke with tears streaming down her face, but with newfound clarity. Surrender would save nothing. If she backed down now, the system would continue destroying lives, extracting wealth from vulnerable communities, and punishing anyone who dared challenge its authority. Her granddaughter might be returned, but she would grow up in a world where injustice triumphed because good people gave up. With renewed determination, Eleanor carefully removed the monitoring device from her arm and reached for the hospital phone. There was one call she had not yet made, one strategy she had not yet attempted. The risks were enormous, But she was fighting opponents who believed themselves untouchable, who operated with impunity because their victims were isolated and outmatched. "It's time to change the equation," Eleanor whispered to herself as she dialed. "If they want war, I'll give them war." Eleanor Washington had not survived 30 years investigating powerful, corrupt officials without developing contingency plans. What Judge Hargrove and his allies failed to understand was that a lifetime in the Department of Justice had taught her never to keep all her evidence in one place, never to rely on a single strategy, and never to underestimate the vindictiveness of those who abuse power. From her hospital bed, Eleanor initiated what she privately called her scorched earth protocol. The first call went to Special Agent Raymond Diaz, a former FBI colleague now heading the Bureau's Public Corruption Unit. Their friendship extended back 20 years, built on mutual respect and multiple successful prosecutions of officials who believed themselves untouchable. "Raymond, someone took my granddaughter," Eleanor stated without preamble when he answered. "I need the kind of help that doesn't come with paperwork." "Tell me everything," he replied immediately. Within hours, an unmarked FBI surveillance team arrived in Millfield County, operating under Diaz's direct authority rather than through the compromised local field office. Eleanor's second strategic move targeted the traitor in her team. Rather than exposing Jenny Keene's betrayal, she began feeding her carefully crafted misinformation through secure channels the young woman believed remained uncompromised. False meeting locations, manufactured evidence discoveries, and misleading strategies flowed to Judge Hargrove and his allies, creating confusion and wasting their resources as they chased phantoms. Meanwhile, Eleanor quietly reconnected with her network of retired DOJ colleagues across the country. These veterans of civil rights enforcement and public corruption investigations had maintained their own connections and influence. Many had faced similar opposition during their careers and understood exactly what Eleanor was experiencing. The Millfield situation has become a priority, former Assistant Attorney General Caroline Hayes informed Eleanor during a secure call. "We've activated our network. Retired judges, prosecutors, investigators, all focused on creating pressure from multiple directions." This shadow network of justice professionals began systematic outreach to current officials, reminding them that careers outlast political protection and that involvement in covering up civil rights violations carried personal liability that no powerful patron could erase. Subtle but unmistakable pressure mounted on state and federal officials who had distanced themselves from Eleanor's investigation. National civil rights organizations, alerted by Caroline Hayes, launched their own independent investigations into Millfield County's judicial practices. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, American Civil Liberties Union, and Southern Poverty Law Center deployed researchers and attorneys to document patterns of discrimination and constitutional violations. Unlike Eleanor's vulnerable local team, these organizations had the resources and political connections to withstand intimidation. The most significant breakthrough came unexpectedly. Eleanor's granddaughter Zora, despite her youth, proved remarkably resilient and resourceful. While her captors believed they were holding a frightened teenager, they were actually containing a young woman raised by a DOJ investigator who had taught her to observe, remember, and identify weaknesses in threatening situations. During a brief supervised bathroom break, Zora managed to scratch identifying information about her location into a hidden corner of the bathroom wall. Storage Facility, Unit 23, Blue Ridge Road. When eventually transferred to another location, she deliberately left behind a hair clip containing her DNA, ensuring forensic evidence of her presence remained. On her 10th day of captivity, Zora created her opportunity. She had carefully noted that one of her guards consistently checked his phone during shift changes, becoming momentarily distracted. During one such moment, she executed her escape, using self-defense techniques Eleanor had insisted she learn. Though injured in the process, she made it to a neighboring business where an employee recognized her from the missing person reports and contacted authorities. Zora's escape and the information she provided became the turning point in Eleanor's counteroffensive. The storage unit contained not only evidence of Zora's captivity, but documentation linking the facility to a security company on Millfield County's approved vendor list. This connection provided federal authorities with justification for a warranted search that revealed financial records tying the company directly to Judge Hargrove's brother-in-law. With Zora safe and recovering, Eleanor accelerated her strategy. An anonymous whistleblower within the courthouse, inspired by the gathering momentum against corruption, provided security footage showing court officials removing evidence from records rooms after hours. The footage clearly identified Judge Hargrove directing the removal of specific case files that Eleanor's team had flagged as showing patterns of discrimination. Eleanor implemented a sophisticated media strategy, working through her retired colleagues to place evidence strategically, with multiple outlets simultaneously. Rather than relying on the compromised local media, she distributed documentation to national publications, legal journals, and established investigative reporters in neighboring states. Each received different pieces of the puzzle, ensuring that no single outlet could be pressured into killing the story. "We're creating too many fronts for them to fight on," Eleanor explained to her core team, now operating from a secure location established by Raymond Diaz. "They can intimidate one reporter, pressure one newspaper, threaten one witness. They can't silence dozens of independent sources revealing different aspects of the same corruption." Eleanor established secure communication protocols drawing on her DOJ experience, creating redundant channels that allowed witnesses to provide information without exposing themselves to retaliation. Using encryption methods and anonymous reporting mechanisms, she rebuilt her evidence database beyond the reach of local interference. The most powerful addition to Eleanor's coalition came when Judge William Marshall, a respected retired federal judge with impeccable credentials, publicly endorsed the investigation. "The allegations regarding Millfield County's judicial practices warrant immediate and thorough federal review," he stated in a Washington Post opinion piece. The patterns described by former DOJ investigator Eleanor Washington align with recognized indicators of systematic civil rights violations in court systems. Judge Marshall's intervention changed the political calculus dramatically. As a Reagan appointee with conservative credentials, his support couldn't be dismissed as partisan activism. His reputation for integrity made attacks on his motives backfire against those attempting to discredit the investigation. The combination of multiple independent investigations, media coverage beyond local control, forensic evidence from Zora's captivity, and the public support of respected legal figures finally convinced federal authorities to engage officially. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division announced a formal investigation into Millfield County's judicial practices, focusing on patterns of discrimination in sentencing and enforcement. Federal investigators will review court records, sentencing data, and enforcement patterns to determine whether systematic civil rights violations have occurred, the announcement stated. This investigation is separate from any potential criminal inquiries regarding allegations of judicial misconduct, evidence tampering, or witness intimidation. The official engagement of federal authorities fundamentally changed the power dynamics. In Millfield County, Judge Hargrove and his allies, accustomed to operating with impunity in their local domain, now faced opponents with greater resources, jurisdiction, and authority than their local network could counter. Eleanor, though still recovering from her health crisis, felt the momentum shifting. The conspiracy of silence was breaking down as witnesses gained confidence that federal protection would shield them from local retaliation. Evidence thought destroyed re-emerged from secure backups Eleanor had established early in her investigation. Most importantly, Zora was safe, her resilience and courage an inspiration to everyone involved in exposing the truth. "They thought they could break us by attacking our families, our livelihoods, our reputations," Eleanor told her team as federal. Investigators began arriving in Millfield County, but they never understood what truly motivates people to fight for justice. It's not anger or revenge, it's love. Love for our families, our communities, and the principles this country is supposed to stand for. As federal agents established their presence in Millfield County, Eleanor Washington prepared for what would be the most dramatic confrontation of her distinguished career. The Millfield County Courthouse had never seen a day like this. Outside, media vans lined the street as reporters from national outlets jostled with local journalists for position. A crowd of citizens, predominantly from minority communities, most affected by Judge Hargrove's discriminatory practices, gathered on the courthouse steps, holding signs demanding accountability. State police maintained a visible presence, their jurisdiction deliberately chosen over the compromised local sheriff's department. Inside courtroom 3, Judge Richard Hargrove prepared to begin the day's proceedings with an outward appearance of normalcy. Despite the gathering storm around him, he maintained the fiction that his authority remained absolute within these walls. The docket listed routine traffic cases and minor offenses, the bread and butter of his judicial domain, and the foundation of the systematic extraction of wealth from vulnerable communities. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Hargrove entered, his expression betraying no concern as he took his seat at the bench. The gallery was unusually full, with observers whose formal attire and watchful expressions suggested they were not typical courthouse spectators. First case, Judge Hargrove announced with practiced authority. The courtroom doors opened and Eleanor Washington entered. She walked confidently to the center of the courtroom, supported not by a cane or medical device despite her recent hospitalization, but by the strength of purpose that had defined her 30-year career. Judge Hargrove's composure flickered momentarily before he regained control. "Ms. Washington, you're not on today's docket. If you have business with this court, you need to speak with the clerk to schedule an appearance." "Your Honor," Eleanor replied, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the now silent courtroom, "I'm here on the matter of the people versus justice." The judge's expression hardened. "Bailiff, please remove Ms. Washington if she continues to disrupt these proceedings." The bailiff hesitated, suddenly uncertain. His eyes moved to the gallery where several individuals had subtly opened their jackets to reveal federal credentials. Among the observers, Eleanor had strategically positioned Raymond Diaz and 3 other federal agents, their presence a silent reminder that this was no longer Hargrove's unchallenged domain. "Before you proceed, Your Honor," Eleanor continued, removing documents from her briefcase, "I believe the court should be aware of evidence that directly impacts your ability to preside over cases involving minority defendants." She placed on the evidence table a bound report nearly 3 inches thick. This dossier contains documented evidence of systematic disparities in sentencing based on race, ex parte communications with prosecutors regarding minority defendants, financial conflicts of interest in cases where you hold investments affected by outcomes, and witness testimony regarding explicit bias expressed in non-public settings. Judge Hargrove's face flushed with anger. "This is contempt of court. I will not allow these slanderous accusations." "They're not accusations, Your Honor. They're evidence." Eleanor placed a USB drive beside the printed report. "This drive contains all digital documentation, including courthouse security footage, showing removal of case files after my team identified them as showing patterns of discrimination. It includes audio recordings of conversations in chambers where derogatory racial language was used to describe defendants. It includes financial records, tracing your investments in Wellspring Correctional Services, which directly profits from your unusually high incarceration rates for minority defendants." The courtroom remained deathly silent as Eleanor continued methodically presenting her evidence. The documentation includes statistical analysis of 5,473 cases over your 15-year tenure, showing that black defendants receive sentences averaging 67% longer than white defendants for identical offenses with similar criminal histories. Judge Hargrove attempted to regain control, striking his gavel forcefully. "This court will not be held hostage by unsupported allegations. Bailiff, remove Ms. Washington immediately." Eleanor remained unmoved. "Your Honor, you should be aware that everything occurring in this courtroom is being transmitted in real time to the Department of Justice headquarters in Washington. Attempting to suppress evidence of judicial misconduct would constitute an additional federal offense." For the first time, real fear showed in Judge Hargrove's eyes as he noticed the small camera discreetly positioned on Eleanor's lapel. The technological sophistication had not been part of his calculation when dealing with whom he had dismissed as a troublesome grandmother. Furthermore, Eleanor continued relentlessly, federal agents are currently executing search warrants at the offices of Millfield Properties, Wellspring Correctional Services, and the private residences of yourself and 6 other county officials implicated in this conspiracy. The warrants are based on evidence including documentation of the attempted bribery of witnesses, the kidnapping of my granddaughter, and financial records showing judicial decisions correlating directly with personal investment benefits. Judge Hargrove's composure finally shattered completely. This is a witch hunt, a conspiracy against those trying to maintain law and order in communities that don't respect authority. You people never understand that some neighborhoods need stronger enforcement, stronger deterrence. The racial undertone of "you people" hung in the air as gasps spread through the courtroom. Several spectators began recording on their phones as the judge continued his unraveling. 30 years I've served this community, keeping troublemakers off the streets, maintaining order, and now some retired bureaucrat thinks she can come in here with her federal friends and destroy everything we've built. Eleanor maintained her professional demeanor despite the judge's meltdown. Your Honor, I'm formally requesting your recusal from all cases involving minority defendants due to demonstrated bias and conflicts of interest. Additionally, I'm submitting evidence supporting a request for review of all sentences imposed during your tenure where statistical disparities suggest potential civil rights violations. As Judge Hargrove's tirade continued, growing increasingly explicit in its racial language, the courtroom doors opened again. Federal marshals entered, moving with practiced efficiency toward the bench. Richard Hargrove, the lead marshal announced, formally, I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy against rights under color of law, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and kidnapping. This is my courtroom, Judge Hargrove shouted, his face contorted with rage. You have no jurisdiction here. Your Honor, Eleanor stated calmly, I've spent 30 years investigating judicial misconduct. I've seen judges like you in courthouses across this country, believing their authority makes them untouchable, believing their power shields them from accountability. Each one was wrong. Judge Hargrove, sensing the inevitable, attempted a desperate final gambit. I need to secure sensitive documents in my chambers, he announced, standing abruptly. Court is in recess until this matter is clarified. He moved quickly toward his chamber door, but federal agents had anticipated this reaction. 2 marshals were already positioned at the private exit, blocking his escape. As the judge realized he was trapped, he reached toward his desk drawer. Step away from the desk, commanded the lead marshal. Place your hands where we can see them. For a tense moment it seemed Judge Hargrove might resist physically. Then, with a final glare of hatred toward Eleanor, he allowed the marshals to take him into custody. As he was led from the courtroom, the gallery erupted in a combination of shocked murmurs and suppressed cheers from those who had suffered under his discriminatory rulings. Eleanor Washington stood at the center of the courtroom, watching as the symbols of corrupt authority were literally removed before her eyes. The confrontation had been more public and dramatic than she had anticipated, but perhaps that visibility was necessary. The system had operated in shadows for too long, its abuses normalized through secrecy and intimidation. As Judge Hargrove disappeared through the courtroom doors, Eleanor opened her briefcase one final time. She removed a comprehensive dossier documenting 15 years of judicial misconduct, civil rights violations, and corruption throughout Millfield County's judicial system. She placed it deliberately on the judge's now vacant bench. For the record, she announced to the court reporter, who continued dutifully transcribing, Justice has been deferred in this courthouse for far too long. Today, that deferral ends. The arrest of Judge Richard Hargrove proved to be merely the beginning of a comprehensive reckoning for Millfield County's corrupt power structure. Within days, the Department of Justice expanded its investigation to encompass the entire county, judicial system, law enforcement agencies, and local government. Federal agents armed with warrants based on Eleanor's meticulously reconstructed evidence conducted simultaneous raids on the offices of the district attorney, police chief, county commissioner, and 3 additional judges implicated in the discriminatory scheme. Computer servers were seized, revealing communications that participants had believed permanently deleted. Financial records exposed the complex web of investments connecting judicial decisions to personal profit. The scope of corruption proved even more extensive than Eleanor had initially documented, beyond the racially biased sentencing and financial conflicts of interest. Investigators uncovered evidence of fabricated evidence in cases against minority defendants, systematic exclusion of minority jurors, and deliberate manipulation of bond requirements to extract maximum profit from the private bail bond company connected to Judge Hargrove's family. This isn't just about one rogue judge, the U.S. attorney announced at a press conference 3 weeks after Hargrove's arrest. Our investigation has revealed a systematic enterprise operating under color of law to deny equal justice and extract wealth from targeted communities. Today, we are announcing indictments against 17 officials, including judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, and government administrators. For Eleanor Washington, professional vindication came with bittersweet awareness of the human cost. As news of the federal investigation spread, hundreds of individuals came forward with stories of lives destroyed by excessive sentences, families devastated by financial penalties they couldn't afford, and communities systematically denied equal protection under law. Eleanor found herself appointed to a federal oversight committee charged with reviewing thousands of cases handled by the implicated judges. The committee established criteria for identifying potentially tainted judgments, focusing on racial disparities in sentencing, procedural irregularities, and cases involving investments in which judges held financial interests. Our priority must be remedial justice, Eleanor explained during the committee's first public hearing. For too long, these communities have been told that justice is blind, while experiencing a system that saw their race with perfect clarity and punished them accordingly. The review process revealed over 3,000 cases requiring reconsideration. Many individuals remained incarcerated based on discriminatory sentencing practices or questionable evidence. Others, though free, continued to suffer collateral consequences from convictions that might not have occurred in a fair system. With characteristic determination, Eleanor established a legal defense fund to support victims of judicial discrimination. Using her connections throughout the legal community, she assembled a team of attorneys willing to provide pro bono representation for individuals seeking to have their cases reviewed. "This isn't charity," Eleanor told the volunteer lawyers. "This is correcting a systematic failure of the justice system to provide equal protection under law. Every case we overturn represents years of someone's life taken unjustly, opportunities denied, families separated, and communities damaged." The media narrative transformed as evidence of corruption became impossible to ignore. Journalists who had initially characterized Eleanor as a vindictive retiree now portrayed her as a courageous whistleblower who had risked everything to expose entrenched injustice. Documentary filmmakers requested interviews. Law schools invited her to speak about institutional corruption and the challenges of reform. Eleanor accepted these opportunities selectively, focusing her limited energy on practical efforts to help those directly harmed by the corrupt system. She was acutely aware that public attention often elevated individual heroes, while overlooking the communities that suffered most directly from injustice. "The real story isn't about me," she consistently told reporters. "It's about a system that allowed powerful people to profit from discrimination, and about the courage of ordinary citizens who ultimately stood up against that system despite enormous personal risk." Congressional hearings on judicial accountability featured Eleanor as a key witness. Her testimony detailed not just the specifics of the Millfield County corruption, but the structural factors that enabled it to flourish: inadequate oversight, mechanisms, conflicts of interest in judicial appointment processes, and the vulnerability of local courts to capture by entrenched power structures. "What happened in Millfield County is not unique," Eleanor testified. "Similar patterns exist throughout our judicial system, particularly in jurisdictions where demographic changes have not been reflected in the composition of the judiciary or where private financial interests have been allowed to influence public administration of justice. The most difficult period came when the imprisoned Judge Hargrove, facing decades in federal prison and desperate to reduce his sentence, attempted one final vindictive act. Using connections not yet identified by investigators, he orchestrated the release of falsified evidence suggesting that Eleanor's late daughter had been involved in criminal activity before her death. The smear campaign, designed to discredit Eleanor and distract from the corruption investigation, targeted not just her professional reputation, but her most painful personal loss. Eleanor weathered this attack with the same dignity that had defined her response to each previous challenge. Rather than engaging in public denials that would only amplify the false allegations, she continued her methodical work on the Oversight Committee, allowing the obvious desperation behind the attack to speak for itself. Ultimately, Judge Hargrove and 13 other officials pleaded guilty to various federal charges rather than face the overwhelming evidence against them in public trials. The plea agreements required full cooperation, leading to additional prosecutions of private interests that had benefited from the corrupt system. The final phase of the Millfield County reckoning focused on institutional reform. Federal monitors oversaw reorganization of the courthouse procedures, implementation of transparent sentencing guidelines, and establishment of community oversight mechanisms. Judicial appointments underwent unprecedented scrutiny, with explicit attention to demographic representation and potential conflicts of interest. For Eleanor personally, the conclusion of the legal proceedings allowed her to refocus on her family. Zora, despite the trauma of her kidnapping, had demonstrated remarkable resilience. Her experience had inspired her to pursue a career in law, with specific interest in juvenile justice reform. "You showed me that one person really can make a difference, Grandma," Zora told Eleanor as they sat together on the porch of the home that had once been vandalized with racial slurs, but now stood as a symbol of perseverance, even when the entire system seems stacked against you. Marcus, too, had found inspiration in his grandmother's courage. His technological skills, initially developed as typical teenage interests, had proven crucial in recovering digital evidence. Now in his final year of high school, he planned to study cybersecurity, with focus on protecting vulnerable organizations from digital attacks. On a cool autumn evening, 5 years after her fateful traffic court appearance, Eleanor Washington sat in the auditorium of Millfield Community College. The school's Law and Justice program had invited her to meet with students pursuing careers in legal administration, law enforcement, and community advocacy. Looking out at the diverse young faces, Eleanor felt cautious optimism. The systematic corruption she had exposed had deep historical roots and would not be permanently eliminated by a single investigation, no matter how thorough. True reform required not just prosecuting individual bad actors, but transforming institutional cultures and power structures. "The work of justice is never complete," she told the students. "Each generation inherits both the progress and the failures of those who came before. Your responsibility is not just to avoid the obvious corruption we exposed in this county, but to actively create systems that deliver equal justice even when no one is watching." After her formal presentation, a young black woman approached hesitantly. "Ms. Washington, I was only 12 when you confronted Judge Hargrove, but I remember it clearly. My father was serving an 8-year sentence for a minor drug offense, while white defendants walked free for the same crime. Because of your work, he came home 3 years ago. I just wanted to say thank you." For Eleanor Washington, this simple acknowledgement meant more than all the congressional testimony, media interviews, and professional recognition combined. One family reunited, one injustice corrected, one young person inspired to continue the work of creating a more just system. As she looked across the changed landscape of Millfield County, Eleanor recognized that her confrontation with Judge Hargrove had been just one battle in a much longer struggle for equal justice. Discrimination and corruption would continue to find new forms, new disguises, new mechanisms for perpetuating inequality. But she had demonstrated something powerful, that individuals of conscience, standing together despite fear and retaliation, could successfully challenge even the most entrenched systems of injustice. Justice had been deferred in Millfield County for generations. Thanks to the courage of one retired grandmother who refused to accept an unjust traffic ticket, that deferral had finally ended. For countless families affected by the corrupt system, true justice was at last being served. Justice deferred teaches us that true justice requires courage in the face of entrenched power. Eleanor Washington's story demonstrates that systems of discrimination persist not because they are invincible, but because they rarely face coordinated, determined opposition. Her journey reminds us that individual actions, however small initially, can expose injustice and inspire collective resistance. The story highlights how corruption thrives in isolation and darkness, depending on victims feeling powerless and alone. Eleanor's persistence, despite overwhelming opposition, shows that accountability is possible even against powerful figures who believe themselves untouchable. Her strategic thinking building coalitions, securing evidence through multiple channels, and leveraging institutional knowledge provides a blueprint for effective advocacy. Perhaps most importantly, the story illustrates that justice is not an abstract ideal, but a practical necessity with real human consequences. Every discriminatory sentence, every biased ruling, every abuse of power damages lives, families, and communities. True reform requires not just removing corrupt individuals, but rebuilding systems with transparency, accountability, and equal protection at their foundation. Has there ever been a time when you witnessed injustice but felt powerless to challenge it? What would you have done in Eleanor's position when facing such overwhelming opposition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of courage against corruption resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more narratives that shine light on systemic injustice and the brave individuals who fight against it. Remember, as Eleanor showed us, even the most entrenched systems can be changed when people of conscience stand together. Thank you for joining me on this journey through justice deferred. May it inspire us all to recognize that justice delayed need not be justice denied.